Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with a preview of this Saturday's Cigar Mile, highlighting an outstanding card at Aqueduct. Now, before we get into it, I want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel today. Now, subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos are dropping on the channel. Race previews like this one, full card analyses. We have an interview with Hall of Fame trainer Nick Zito, where he talks about his previous two Remsen winners, including Go for Gin. A lot of great stuff there. And we also have a lot of great content focused on getting you ready for the Kentucky Derby, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. So you definitely want to press that like button and subscribe today. And oh, by the way, we got a lot of fun stuff coming up next week with Oaklawn Park. Might have some stuff with Paul LaDuca. I don't know, Phillies fan and a former New York Mets. We'll have to work that one out, but going to have a lot of fun here on the channel. So make sure to subscribe today. Well, like I said, we're going to be focused on the Cigar Mile today, and this is a really interesting race. You have a field of 11. Grade 2, though it looks certainly like a Grade 1 race to me, you have 5 previous Grade 1 winners in this field, including the number 1 horse, Bookham Danno, and your morning line favorite, Mullikin, as well. This one, of course, is a mile for 3-year-olds and up on the dirt. Last year, won by Hoist the Gold, finishing second, Senor Buscador. And this is a really intriguing race. And I say it's an intriguing race because on a certain level, a horse like Mullikin, in my opinion, is very divisive because on one level, he fits the Hoist the Gold profile. Kind of a sprinter stretching out to a mile that you're not sure he can get the distance, but man, maybe he gets out up front and just goes. And he's got Flavian Pratt aboard. 3-1 is a short price to take on a horse like that. So I understand Mullikin fits the profile, very similar to a horse like Hoist the Gold, and is probably a higher caliber horse, certainly, than Hoist the Gold. But I just think it is maybe a little bit of a risky bet. And I say that because one of the other storylines that I'm looking at in the Cigar Mile is that 3 of your top contenders, Mullikin, Post Time, and Senor Buscador, are all coming out of the Breeders' Cup. Now, this goes to an angle that I've been playing for a while. I got to give a good shout out to my friend Gino Piccola, who's always been playing this angle and talks to me about it regularly. And that is playing against horses coming out of the Breeders' Cup. You have to understand, horses that are pointed towards the Breeders' Cup, their entire campaign has been geared towards the Breeders' Cup. Their entire campaign has not been geared towards the race after the Breeders' Cup. In a lot of cases, these horses are cranked up about as high as they're going to get for that Breeders' Cup race, and there is a natural letdown that takes place. Last week, we saw a horse like Jonathan's Way, huge favorite in the Kentucky Jockey Club, coming out of a rather disappointing effort in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, finish second, and lose in the Kentucky Jockey Club coming out of the Breeders' Cup. So I tend to be skeptical about horses coming out of the Breeders' Cup. And like I said, that's what Mullikin's doing coming out of the Breeders' Cup Sprint. That's what Senor Buscador is doing coming out of the Breeders' Cup Classic. And that's what Post Time's doing coming out of the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. All 3 of those horses are very good. Mullikin going to be up front in this race, but he's going to have company. You're going to have a horse like Nelson Avenue for Wayne Potts. This is a horse that has found new form in this barn and has really started to show a lot of speed. And so Nelson Avenue is going to be up front. Repo Rocks for Jamie Ness. That's a horse that has traditionally shown speed, though recently maybe not quite as much. You would imagine the inside draw with how large the field is. They're going to want to be pretty aggressive and get out there in a forward position. Mullikin, as I mentioned. The other horse to really look at, I think, is Pipeline for Cherie DeVoe. That's a horse that really only has one way to win, which is to go straight to the front. So whether or not Pipeline's good enough in this field, probably not. But he's only got one way to win, so I know what he's going to do, which is to go straight to the front. Now, then you have a bunch of horses that have a little bit more versatility. A horse like Bookham Danno, from the inside rail, Irad Ortiz Jr. might be a little bit more aggressive, but he's got the big speed to his right outside. It's a little bit of a tricky spot for Bookham Danno. Actually reminds me a little bit of his predicament that he had in the Woody Stevens. Now, that day when he won up at Saratoga, getting that Grade 1 win for Bookham Danno, what happened was that field got so strung out because the pace was so nuclear up on the front end that he actually ended up getting a perfectly good trip breaking from that inside rail, not having issues with the speed right next to him. It'll be interesting to see. I don't envision this race setting those types of fractions, obviously. So might not be quite as strung out, but he's going to get that inside trip. Has Irad Ortiz Jr. aboard. It can come from off the pace, can sit a little bit closer, has won gate to wire in the past. So a couple of different things to do there. The other thing to point out about Bookham Danno is he's never won at a mile. He's finished second twice. Now, one of those seconds was in the Nashua as a 2-year-old. The other one of those second places was by a nose in the Saudi Derby to Forever Young. It's hard to hold that against him, really. Now, I think the mile might be his max, but he's been training nicely, putting in the 5 furlong works, which I always like to see, building up that foundation leading up to his career-long race, or tied for his career-long race, I guess I should say. So Bookham Danno, listen, at 4-1, certainly a legitimate contender here. You look at Mullikin, the morning line favorite. Like I said, he fits the hoist the gold profile of a sprinter stretching out to a mile. And you can get a mile here for sure. And this is one that won the Forgo, won the NYRA before that, and really has come into his own as a 4-year-old this year, sired by Violence, and goes to the Breeders' Cup Sprint and finishes third to Straight No Chaser and Ben Tornado, who both ran huge that day. Was a little bit wide, didn't get off to the best start that day, was shuffled a little further back than I think he would prefer. And, now is going to be coming back here 3-1. If he gets a better trip, he could be dangerous. I just worry about that last half furlong for a horse like Mullikin. Can he get the mile, especially if there's more pressure on him on the front end? I think that is just something to be concerned about. Now, you could look at his 2 efforts in the NYRA and the Forgo, both going 7 furlongs, and he was extending his lead in both instances. He keeps Flavian Pratt aboard. There's a lot of things to like there, but again, coming out of the Breeders' Cup Sprint, I generally am going to try to beat a horse like this 3-1, a tepid favorite, going a new distance, and going against a rather large field. Important to point out, the fields of the Forgo and the NYRA combined were just a little bit bigger than this one field here. So going to be facing, I think, much tougher overall competition in this spot. And if you go back and look, the horse he beat in the NYRA, Coastal Mission, was less than 2 lengths back. Coastal Mission is a 12-1 long shot in this race. So again, I think there are some questions about just kind of how good the competition is that he has beaten, but certainly has run very well. Pair of 100-plus buyer speed figure efforts in Saratoga over the summer. Now let's talk about post time for Brittany Russell, jockeyed by Sheldon Russell. And this is a horse that likes to come from off the pace. Just came in second to Full Serrano in that BC Dirt Mile. Before that, blew out the field in the Polynesian. Does have a pair of graded stakes victories. Did win the General George and did win the Carter back last year, or earlier this year, February and April. Here's the concern I have with post time. Outside of the Carter, which we're going to get to in a second, he's never won outside of Aqueduct. Or he's never won outside of Laurel Park, I should say. So it's hard for me to put a ton of confidence in a horse like this that's never won outside of Laurel to suddenly win a pretty big race with a significant field outside of Laurel. Now, he did win at Aqueduct. He won that Carter. That Carter was a 4-horse field, and that was a race where Super Chow went straight to the front and started lugging out, as Super Chow always does. Post time, and Sheldon Russell, Sheldon must not have watched any of Super Chow's highlights, because for some reason he decides to put post time to Super Chow's outside. So Super Chow is lugging out into post time, creating all sorts of problems coming down the stretch, but ultimately is able to beat Castle Chaos by just a neck, and Whittington Park finishes 4th. Now, listen, Castle Chaos is a nice horse. Finished second, like I said, in that race. Since then, finishes 4th by 6 lengths in the Met Mile, and then has come back to run 3rd and 7th in optional claimers up at Saratoga. So, I mean, you're hardly talking about an overwhelming field in this particular spot. And also, Super Chow's a very nice horse, but going a little bit longer, like the Carter was, is never Super Chow's game. So I feel like post time, very nice horse, dominant at Laurel Park, but I do think there are questions at this higher level. And that said, the horse has never missed the board in his career. And he is a perfect 14 for 14, finishing in the top 3, 9 wins. This horse likes to win. He runs well. He'd be included in my verticals. But again, at a relatively short price, I'm going to be playing against him. Senor Buscador is the other horse coming out of the Breeders' Cup, coming out of the Breeders' Cup Classic. Made a little bit of a run to finish 5th. My dad was very pleased with this. My dad loves Senor Buscador. And he's a cool horse. And I think he's best around 1 turn. But he's got 2 races left in his career. That has already been announced by Todd Fincher. He's going to run here and he's going to run in the Pegasus World Cup. I worry about coming back from that Breeders' Cup Classic. That Classic, he got the perfect pace setup. I mean, they were going way too fast up front in that Breeders' Cup Classic. And yes, he closed from the back, but he didn't maybe make quite the move that I thought he would be able to make on Fierceness, Sierra Leone, and the other horses coming who were up on the front end. Fierceness being the one who was being up on the front end, Sierra Leone making that late run. But Senor Buscador has Joel Rosario aboard. And again, I do wonder how much is left in the tank for Senor Buscador, knowing these are the last 2 races. He finished second in this race last year. He can make a big move. There's no 2 ways about it. If he gets the right pace set up, he should get a decent pace set up. I think he's best with 1 turn. 6-1 is an honest price on him. If you can get that, I understand why you would want to include him in your win bets and your horizontal wagers. I would not dissuade someone from using Senor Buscador. And what I will say is Aqueduct, through a very short period of time for the first month of this meet, 1-turn miles have been playing a little bit more favorably to closers than they have in the past. About a quarter of your winners in 1-turn miles have been coming from more than 3 lengths back at the half-mile mark. So you can close on this track a little bit better than you could last year. By Saturday, the conditions look to be very nice, so it should be a fast track and no concerns about sloppy or wet tracks for Saturday. Now, the horse that I want to talk a little bit more about is Locked. And in my opinion, Locked is the X factor in this race. He's the horse. He's going to be my top pick. If you go to NYRA Bets, you can read my race of the week analysis and you can get more there. But he's a horse that I'm just really intrigued by. 9-2 in the morning line. I think he presents good value out of the top contenders. He was a very promising 2-year-old. Ran in what turned out to be a pretty good race in debut at Saratoga, finishing second to Just Steel and BU, who was a very well thought of Todd Pletcher horse. It was probably the more better thought of Todd Pletcher horse in that race, actually, at the time. Then comes back to absolutely blow out the field and beats a horse like Drumroll Please, who ends up running 3rd in the Remsen and winning the and end up winning the Jerome Stakes later. Also in that race was a horse Resilience, who won the Wood Memorial. And so beat some nice horses in that race and broke his maiden very impressively that day. Then comes back and wins the Breeders' Futurity at Keeneland. Goes out to Santa Anita, and remember the tour de force that Fierceness put on. You know, Locked ran a really nice race coming from well off the pace that day. Finished 3rd, right with Muth in that, 2nd, 3rd position. So that was a really good effort, I thought, in the grand scheme of things. But then getting ready for his 2024 debut in the Fountain of Youth, had a little bit of a foot issue, had a little bit of an injury and a setback, put on the bench for a significant amount of time. Pletcher's working his way back, and in October brings him back in a 62,000 optional claimer with Lasix on. The horse shows a little bit much better early speed, because this is a horse that usually like to come from off the pace, showed much better early speed, ends up drawing off, winning that 7-furlong race by 7.5 lengths with jockey John Velasquez aboard. Velasquez stays aboard, and it's important to point out Velasquez won last year's Cigar Mile with Hoist the Gold. Now he's stepping up here. Obviously, we're switching off Lasix, but that's never been an issue in the past. He ran a career best buyer speed figure off the bench. I'd imagine another step forward is certainly potentially in the cards here. And this is one that Pletcher has big plans for. He's already talked about the next race is the Pegasus World Cup for this horse. He's got big plans for Locked. And this is sired by Gunrunner out of a Malibu Moon Dam. This is a horse bred for these types of races, bred for big moments. and he had an extremely promising future. And I think it's important to remember he might have still been one of the top 2 or 3 Kentucky Derby contenders prior to his setback. People were really high on this horse. Now he's come back. He needs to probably take a step forward to run that triple-digit buyer finally in this race. But he's a little bit of an X factor in that I don't know the trip he's going to get. Having Johnny Velazquez aboard helps because I know he's going to show a little bit of early speed. He doesn't have the early speed, though, to compete with Mullikin or Nelson Avenue or even potentially Repo Rocks. He's going to sit more of a tracking trip, I would imagine. And he's going to only get better with distance. He's going to get better the longer the race goes. He does require to be ridden, I think, a little bit more in that he needs to just be gotten after a little bit. And I think some of that might have just been the sluggishness and knocking off some of the rust coming off the bench. But in general, that's just the type of horse he tends to be. So I think that he is one that presents good value, should sit a mid-pack trip, a tracking trip, and John Velazquez aboard makes that move. And as long as he can stay within 3-4 lengths of the lead, I think he's got a great shot turning for home because the distance is going to be his friend for sure. And I think this is a colt that has an extremely bright future. So this is one I really like a lot at 9-2. Now, if you're looking for some, bigger prices, some long shots, I know, Law Professor, I've heard some scuttlebutt might not be in this race. We'll have to just kind of see how that plays out. But that's just kind of been some rumblings that I've heard that Law Professor might end up focusing on another race instead of this one. So we'll have to wait and see. I do think a horse like Coastal Mission is a really honest horse, but might be a little up against it against this level of competition. Just got his first graded stakes win last time out and would need to get a little bit faster to compete against the best of this group. I think you look at a horse like Pipeline for Cherie DeVoe. That's one that when Pipeline gets his trip, he can look really, really impressive. But I do just wonder, I just don't think he's going to be able to get the right sort of trip, though he does drawn outside of all the other major speed in this race, which is going to be advantageous. Junior Alvarado aboard for Pipeline. So, certainly would be capable at a big price to potentially win this if he gets the right pace and the right setup and the right trip. I already mentioned Bookham Danno, very good horse on the inside for Derek Ryan. I like this horse a lot, but ultimately my top pick is going to be Locked. And my general philosophy in this race is I'm going to be trying to beat Mullikin. And I'm going to exclude Mullikin from my tickets. I'm going to be including Locked. I'll probably include Bookham Danno. Might try to even get past post time. We'll see. I could go pretty skinny here. I might just go too deep in this particular leg and try to close out the pick 5 with a little bit more of a price. But it's an interesting race. The dynamics are going to be fascinating. Who comes back and bounces back from the Breeders' Cup is going to be fascinating. And whether or not a pair of 3-year-olds like Bookham Danno or Locked can really take a step forward and announce themselves as really serious older horses to contend with in 2025. All right, friends, that'll do it for the preview of the Cigar Mile. Appreciate you tuning in and make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel today. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.